Welcome to the CSI webinar on cloud and regulated markets. Thank you for giving up your time this morning. I hope it will be useful. As a word of introduction, there have been big advances in the take-up of cloud recently, but some industries have been reluctant to commit, especially organizations in finance, insurance, and pharmaceutical sectors, where there's a degree of regulatory control. Although there have been some exceptions, it's fair to say that regulated industries have been suspicious of the cloud. In this CSI webinar, Scott Underwood is going to show that having to comply with regulations doesn't mean you have to miss out on the benefits of cloud computing. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Neil. So good morning, everyone. I'm just going to start off with the agenda, what I'm sort of going to cover today. And start off with some of the business drivers, the implications of those, the opportunities that cloud presents, the current state of play from the sort of output of the right scale state of the cloud currently, just give some stats there, the top challenges, and then how we've approached our approach to that kind of meeting compliance within the cloud using Power Cloud X. So to start off with some of the business drivers, I think these are probably familiar to everyone. Cloud's enabling a lot of change within the market. Businesses are really transforming the way they operate. Organizations are changing how they do business, how they operate, and a lot of this is underpinned by technology, and the rate of change is significant currently. They're also looking to connect to customers. It's a huge movement to the sort of markets, the movement of market segmentation to one. And responding to changes in markets is required a lot more rapidly. There's a lot more disruption in the market these days, and traditional IT methods just can't keep up with that rate of change. Also, a lot of these there's a lot of regulatory compliance coming in nowadays, and it's just relentless. And the only way to deal with that is to really embed sort of that compliance management into your processes. And again, traditional IT really struggle with that. And driving innovation, this is critical, really, especially when adopting cloud. It gives you the ability to innovate at a rapid pace, and there's a lot, but also allows entrance into the market a lot easier. So there's a lot more innovation coming in, a lot more disruption within the market, and being able to embrace change quickly and innovate and fail fast almost at the right cost. It is key, really, because there's a lot of companies coming in, and cloud sort of levels the playing field to a lot of adoption. And then you've got the typical that every organisation is concerned with, which is managing cost. So if you look at that kind of implications of this, you've got new business and operating models. They require new compliance models. The rate of change now is significant, and the traditional way you approach compliance just can't keep up with that. That's coupled with lots of more regulation coming in. GDPR, MiFID, all these kind of things coming in means that you've got more regulation, but you've got a quicker rate of change within your environment. So trying to keep up with that is struggling. You'll struggle with the sort of existing methods of doing things. Data growth is accelerating exponentially with the sort of advent of IoT. There's a huge amount of data coming in to the environment. The amount of personal data that's being retained for sort of analysis and things is growing exponentially. There's more geographical locations as people sort of expand their geographies, and acquisitions and partnerships. So there's a lot more sort of go-to-market strategies with partners to try and sort of divide and conquer, really. And all of these things sort of lead up to this real sort of challenging piece around compliance, and how do you manage that compliance at this rate of change in geographies that are expanding, in data that's expanding? How do you keep those regulatory and those cybersecurity controls in place and not compromise them while still taking advantage of those opportunities? So the cloud sort of meets a lot of these opportunities, or meets a lot of them head on. You can trade the capital expense with variable expense. This is really key currently, especially with the sort of rate of change in security technology to help out with regulatory requirements. Those systems are really expensive to put down on the ground on your own, especially if you're only having to control a very small element of your infrastructure. Having to deploy intrusion detection facilities, logging facilities, all those things, that's a huge amount of capital expense. When you can actually, within the cloud, a lot of those are baked into the infrastructure, and you can just consume them as a consumption charge. It's a lot more efficient way of doing things. Increasing the speed and agility. You know, the great thing about cloud computing is it's point and click. You can deploy a virtual server in a matter of seconds, literally. But then that obviously then conversely has a challenge with compliance and control. You can release a virtual machine into the environment, but you have no controls over that. So you have no control over what that's doing, what data it's holding. So that can be a real challenge. Benefits from massive economies of scale. There is a perception that some elements of the cloud can be quite expensive when you look at it over a course of period of time. But that's because a lot of things are baked into that charge. So all the security aspects, all the logging, all the controls that are inherently built in the cloud are all baked into that price. So actually, when you look at it as a total cost of ownership, it's actually really efficient and very cost effective. And so an example of this is storage. There's huge amounts of data coming into environments now from IoT and data analytics and all these other good things. Which means that there's huge amounts of storage required, and putting storage systems on the ground to meet those is very expensive, especially in IoT world where those data sets might be transient. You might only have them for a period of time while you sort of consume the data, the knowledge out of them, and then get rid of them. If you're having to size for that scale on your storage platform, that's an incredible amount of upfront cost. Whereas with the cloud, you can just consume that on a sort of monthly basis or however long you need it for. The sort of stop spending money on running and maintaining data centers. I mean, I think that's all kind of a sort of a given, really. So don't really need to dwell on that too much. The stop guessing capacities is really important. A lot of the time, software vendors and suppliers and developers even, they sort of go for safety and say the minimum spec you need to run my app is huge. And just because that's better for them, really. They can say that there's no performance issues then. However, you're having to pay for that resource, and a lot of the time that's sitting there idle. I mean, if I look at some of the stats that we have, when we look at some of the deployments that we've got where the software vendor has said, you need to run X, you look at that and it's using that capacity, for literally minutes in a month. And it's just a huge waste of resource, when with the cloud, because you're on a consumption basis, you can just consume that as and when you need it. And then you can go global in minutes. All of the cloud providers have geographical locations all over the world. And the infrastructure is exactly the same in each location. And it's just point and click. If you've got your systems right, you can then just deploy in another region very quickly, very effectively. So just in terms of those kind of challenges, and just sort of bring some numbers to play, really, you have 96% of organizations are using cloud deployment. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, really. The penetration there is the market penetration within cloud to some degree is very extensive. 81% of organizations have some form of hybrid model, various types of hybrid, which we'll sort of touch upon later on. But the biggest concern with all of this is security. It's the biggest challenge for a lot of companies, and that's followed by sort of governance compliance. Of those, 50% of these respondents in the survey, the security was the biggest challenge, but they're yet to implement any security policies. And I think that's down to the sort of fear, really. And I'll touch upon that in sort of a few slides later on, is around trying to take existing policies and apply them to the sort of new way of doing things. It just doesn't work. So I think there's a lot of people out there sort of a bit hesitant, because you need to know how those cloud systems operate. And that knowledge currently is kind of quite rare. 67% of IT professionals say they have no information security certifications. A lot of these cloud environments, they're changing at such a pace, and the certifications to keep up to date, you'll spend your life basically in the classroom trying to keep up. 83% of CIOs admit they have difficulties finding the right security skills to meet the board mandates. Again, this is a huge, the cloud is expanding at a considerable rate, and there's just not the people being able to keep up in terms of with that market penetration, in terms of giving the right skills to people to meet. So it's really key to find the right partner, really, who have those kind of staff in order to meet those mandates. So just a summary of those kind of top challenges in a table, really. We've got the five sort of three stages, really. You've got the beginner of cloud maturity, intermediate, and advanced. But the interesting thing is that the top five in all of these scenarios are the same. Security is sort of there or thereabouts at the top. Managing costs, the lack of expertise, the governance control, and the compliance piece. They're all really important. So when we sort of look at all of that, the principles of security do not change, but the approach has to. You cannot go forward, and this is a lot of mistakes. A lot of organizations make mistakes where they try and take their existing policies and then apply those to the cloud. And unfortunately, that just doesn't work. And they kind of lose focus, really. The most important thing is the outcome. What is the outcome of this policy? What's the purpose of the policy? And that's what people should focus on. We've seen this in numerous clients. I've got one example really where we had a client that was looking to embrace an email cloud platform. Their current policy stated that they're not allowed to store any passwords locally. However, the sort of cloud provider required the password to be temporarily stored locally during sort of the session that they were logged in. Now, that clearly contravenes the policy. And there was a big problem here with the client saying that actually we can't use this because our policy states we can't, store these locally. And unfortunately, the cloud system needs to store them locally. But what they sort of lost focus on is what was the purpose of that policy? This whole kind of why wasn't a password allowed to be stored locally? And when we sort of peeled it back, it was for security purposes. They felt that actually the controls on the local system weren't sufficient enough in order to store that password locally and therefore potentially compromise. Well, actually, the sort of encryption mechanisms and all of the controls that came along with this cloud system meant that actually that password could be stored locally, very securely, very safely, would actually meet the outcome of the original policy. So it's just a simple case of changing the policy to say that passwords could be stored locally, but these controls had to be met in order to preserve the security. So again, it's where companies fall down on. They forget about the outcome and the purpose of the policy, and they try and then sort of apply these policies and then try and change the cloud sort of way that's working to meet those policies, and it's the wrong way round. You need to focus on that outcome. So in just about, so when we talk about approach, just want to now sort of talk about really what we've done in order to change our approach and how we build these things. So just to sort of start off with, really, we recognize that a lot of companies, their sort of transition to this is a big change. So how do we enable companies to take advantage of that change, give them a roadmap to that change, but make that change less risky, for want of a better word, and more efficient? So we sort of went about building Power Cloud X platform within our private data centers, and because we've got complete control over it, it enables us to create any kind of scenario. So whether that be dedicated, multi-tenanted, or a combination of both, we've got complete control over the configuration. So we can run any workload in there, whether that be Windows, Linux, IX, System I, anything we can run in there. And because we've got complete control, we can bring in your existing workloads as is. So the other thing that's really key with all of this embracing cloud is identity. It is absolutely critical with this. Now you have sort of disparate systems. You've got cloud providers, you've got software as a service, you've got various bits and pieces within infrastructure. And now the identity piece is key because it's really important to understand who's accessing what. Now we've created our own piece of IPR called Workspace, which enables us to sort of control what people have access to, who those people are, when they can access them from, when they can access them, where they can access them from, and why. And these sort of 5 tenets are really important to understand what people are doing, because at the end of the day, you need to secure your data, and the best way to secure your data is to understand how it's being used, who's using it, why are they accessing it, where are they accessing it from, so you can understand what your kind of your risk posture is really, or your threat posture. So we created a product called Workspace, which encompasses all of our private cloud and our public cloud, enables to manage that identity and give you sort of interface with your existing directory, and they give you one identity for all of your cloud or software application services. Where we're a little bit different from other providers that are out there that sort of provide federation services is that we can also do what's called sort of password form stuffing for passwords. So we can securely store passwords in this within our secure database, and then inject those passwords into the application that might not support federation. So what that then means is that you don't have any areas of weakness. So if you've got an application that can't be federated and requires a separate username and password, we can bring that username and password under control, which enables you to then sort of have the complete control. You don't have a silo of data out there that you don't have any sort of ability to manage those kind of credentials and who has access to what. So it's quite a unique offering in that regard. The other piece that we've done is the key is the management and orchestration platform. And this is where we've spent a lot of time and effort, and is absolutely key when embracing the cloud. Is that you really need to be able to manage and orchestrate those platforms. And if you can't do that, then the cloud just becomes this big sprawling mess of unknown, really. So it's very key to have an orchestration platform, and then coupled with a management platform for sort of 24/7, and understanding the alerts that come out of those cloud platforms, and also how those cloud platforms operate. We also have a team, compliance navigation team, and this is really important. That they kind of have the ability to take your existing policies and then review them and look at to see if they're sort of fit for purpose for cloud. They are so they can take your existing policies, have a look and see how they are, see if they're fit for purpose cloud, and maybe tweak them, but still achieving the same outcome. We also have a whole bunch of predetermined policies and procedures that we can incorporate into those environments as well. So we've taken that whole kind of management orchestration, the identity piece, and we've expanded that across the platform into the cloud providers. So you have a unified management platform and consistency of an interface into those, so that you can extend your controls effectively from that environment. So how we've done this is that we've extended the virtualization layers from the private cloud into the public cloud. So we do this currently with IBM Cloud's bare metal capability. And what that enables us to do is to create one logical view of the compute and network virtualization. So it's very powerful and very makes it a lot easier for maintaining your existing controls in those cloud environments. Because you see this as one logical unit effectively, we can apply those same controls across. And what that then means is that we can absolutely seamlessly move workloads between the clouds. Because we have a common compute environment, we have a common network environment, we can move them at will between the two with no disruption and no loss of service. And we do this leveraging VMware. We spent a huge amount of time interfacing those two environments into each other, and again, sort of doing the network controls. So therefore, they can just move seamlessly between and preserve same IP addresses and all those other goodness. And again, all of those compliance controls can extend across. Because we've then got that kind of low latency, high speed link into those environments, we can consume platform services. So things like messaging, or middleware, content delivery networks, any of those things that are on a consumption base that you might want to sort of use ad hoc, we can then, for longer periods of time, without having to spend the investment, we can consume those platform services into your private cloud because we have this kind of logical network view and also the single sort of compliance view. That also enables us to resource up and down in order to meet peaked or planned events. Because it's seen as one logical unit, we can deploy additional resources like virtual machines, web servers, database servers, any of those kind of instances within the cloud environment in order to meet planned events. And then we can just destroy them once that kind of event has passed or the peak has passed. Again, very efficient way of using resources. It doesn't mean that you have to plan for peak in your private cloud. You can just take advantage of that consumption computing as and when you need it. So as I sort of mentioned earlier, because we have complete control over the existing within our environment, in order to get into this framework of identity and the management and orchestration, we can migrate your existing workloads as is. Because we have a common platform, or we can create a common platform, we can move them as is into our environment, and therefore reducing the risk of migration or any kind of challenges that might be perceived from transforming from one provider into another. We can just literally take them as is. Everything's still the same, yet you're within the management on orchestration, and you're then within that identity. And because we've created this IPR, we can interface into existing directories. So again, there's no changes for the user. They use the same username and password, and then they can come into, they can start consuming those cloud resources. We also put all of the admin consoles behind Workspace, which gives us another layer of security, because we can abstract things like the global admin. We can store them in our password safe, which is provided by CyberArk. And then only give people access to what they need to do from an admin point of view, which is really key when consuming clouds, that whole kind of role-based security. So I sort of mentioned before, we can take your existing policies. So, and again, this is really key, and this is the sort of the aspect where a lot of companies fall down, or organizations, is that they try and take their existing policies and then just apply them to cloud. You know, that just won't work. They're not compatible. But again, they lose focus on the outcome. So our compliance navigation team will take your existing policies, or we can leverage our model policies, which have been used for numerous regulated environments. They'll take those policies and then they'll tweak them in order to meet the sort of cloud requirement, to sort of take advantage of the cloud services, but without compromising the outcome. So once we've done that, we can then feed that into our what we call Nothing, which is our kind of orchestration platform, and create those policies as code. And what that allows us to do is then run those kind of compliance checks as code against your existing infrastructure, private cloud infrastructure, or against cloud. So it's a very powerful way of doing things. And because it's code, we can run it automatically, and we can run it to a schedule. So we can run this every hour if you want, every day, every month. So it gives us the kind of compliance at speed. Because it's code, we can run it continuously. So we're doing this continuous audit and continuous compliance. That gives us two advantages. One, we can run kind of the baselines against your existing environment, see if they meet up to scratch. If there's any changes that need to be done, we can then modify those changes within the compliance report. So what I mean by that is that the compliance report can run against the system, and then it can sort of say, right, okay, you don't have the right certificate, so here you go, I'm going to install the right certificate. So it's immediate remediation. And this is really key when taking advantage of the cloud. It gives you that compliance at speed. So when people deploy something to the cloud, you've immediately got the compliance engine coming up behind it and saying, right, actually, you don't meet compliance, I'm going to make you compliant. And therefore, you kind of reduce your risk of deploying something that's out of compliance. So just some sort of screenshots of this. We can load any kind of checks within this environment. Now, each check we do, we sort of agree a weighting factor. So things like, if it's got a weighting factor of 1, then it's an immediate action. Something needs to be done. It's failed compliance. Now, that action is that we could take that server out, or we could take that resource out, or we can apply a fix automatically. It really depends on what's the best approach. And then we've got varying degrees, basically below 1, of what that rating might be. So something here like 0.1, there could be, on this report, for example, the server should have more than 20% free disk space on C drive. That's a flag. It's not key to security. It's not key to compliance. It's just something that should be. And it might be actually that this server, that's fine to run at less than 20% free disk space. Doesn't really do anything. It's just a proxy. That's not a problem. So they're kind of alerts, really. And again, that weighting factor really helps us understand how that meets compliance. Once we have everything within the compliance engine, we can then interrogate that. And again, another key aspect around this kind of managing costs and managing control is about what's actually running in your environment. Once it's in that sort of management information, or sort of data warehouse, we can run scans across the environment to identify things like database servers to see, do I have, have I got more database servers than I thought I might have? Which obviously is a risk from a data point of view, because if you don't know about it, then there might be some sensitive data on there that you're not controlling. And two, also licensing costs. Database licensing is incredibly expensive. If you don't know about it and you're not licensing, then you're at risk of license fines from the vendors. Or if you are licensing it but you don't need it, then there's some cost savings to be made there. So it's really important to understand what your inventory is within all of the cloud platforms, and having our Nothing data warehouse as a single source of truth, taking all of those feeds in from the different cloud platforms, it gives you that view across the whole your whole estate. And sort of touching back on that kind of those compliance, profiles. We've developed 185 profiles, and within those, there's 18,000 control checks. And we've used these for FCA regulated environments and PCI certified environments. So we have a lot of these profiles and checks already in place, ready to go. Now, again, once you know what you've got and what it should look like, we can then create patterns for automated builds and configurations. So that enables us to then, again, embrace the speed of the cloud and still meeting compliance. Because we're doing automated builds, we know exactly what they look like. We can deploy them immediately, get that speed, get that agility in, but they don't compromise compliance or controls because they're from known good builds. And then they can be used for things like deploying for peak. You can spin those services up very quickly. Again, automated build done on a gold build configuration that you know is good. And then you have the compliance checks sweeping up to make sure that the configuration is as is expected. That also allows you to spin up test environments, new geographies. And the test environments is quite key, really, because especially if you're doing sort of software release, you might want to do some load testing, or you might have a planned event that you're kind of thinking, I just want to have an idea of sort of load I'm going to get on this. You can spin that environment up very as is, as you have it in production in a test scenario. You have it up for a day, 2 days, only consume that amount of cost for that time, and then close that platform down. And again, so another challenge that a lot of companies, where companies fail in embracing the cloud is they try and take their existing tooling and sort of extend it in. So they've got this kind of outside-in approach. So they take their existing tools and way they do things, and then try and apply that into the cloud again. So things like trying to apply their own sort of logging within the cloud, or their own configuration management in terms of, vulnerability scanning and things like that. A lot of these capabilities are currently within the cloud. And when you try and sort of apply your existing tooling, which was not built for the cloud in mind, it was built for traditional on-premise IT environments, you have a challenge, and you start losing the benefits of that tooling. And you then, and worse, you compromise the benefits of the cloud. So our approach is really an inside-out approach, where we take the existing the sort of tooling that the cloud provider spent a considerable amount of resource and capital on, and we take all the best bits of those and then feed that into our platform. So things like capacity stats, logs, infrastructure alerts, security alerts, all of these are native within the cloud platforms, and they're really good at what they do. So it's really crazy to take that and then try and do something different. Again, you're adding to your cost. Yeah, you're adding to you're compromising the environment, and because they're baked into the kind of native platform, they're inherent. So when something's deployed, they get that with them. So it's crazy to sort of skip over that or ignore those. So we take all of those from all the different cloud providers and put them into a consistent interface and a single pane of glass. So you get that full picture across all of your estate. It's very key, especially if you're running multiple SaaS applications and possibly multiple clouds. You need to have a holistic picture across all of that. And the benefit that we have is that we have a 24/7 SOC and NOC, so we can take those alerts and then do action on those. The big sort of play by the cloud providers is this kind of shared responsibility model, where they're responsible for everything up to the sort of infrastructure layer, so things like physical access, all those kind of controls, cooling, air, and monitoring the network, management networks, and all those other good things. And then you're responsible for everything else. And that's great, but equally, they only tell you when there's a problem. They don't actually necessarily do anything about it. So it's really important to have some form of 24/7 monitoring platform or security operations center in order to take those alerts, which come from the cloud platforms, and then do something with them. And if you've got multiple cloud environments, it's even more important, because you can start spotting trends across the two. Sort of saying, well, okay, I'm starting to see something over here. Actually, that might have an impact on my cloud provider over here. And because those two systems are disparate, they're never going to know about each other, which is where we sort of come in as that middleware piece, really. We bring both of them in, we can analyze those, and then make an assessment across both clouds. Again, it's the mistake where a lot of companies make. So Some of the advantages that we can then take to do with these automated building compliance, we can do peak events, but more importantly, it can be used for disaster recovery. So we can take your systems as is, put them into the sort of the private cloud, and then we can look at leveraging cloud for disaster recovery. And it's a great benefit really, because you can then just use the minimum capacity for critical services. So you have them sitting there as a sort of hot standby or warm standby, where if you have a failure in the sort of private cloud, you can automatically fail over across to DR, with minimal disruption. And then your non-critical services can be spun up in the event of in that actually event of a disaster. So they're things like payroll, which you don't need immediately necessarily, unless you're doing payroll. But the other sort of services like that, they can be spun up within 4 hours. So you don't need to pay for infrastructure sitting there idle on the event that you'll have a disaster. And again, traditional IT can't move that quickly, spinning up a whole environment in a matter of hours. It's just, existing IT departments, no chance. But with the cloud, that's actually a very real possibility. So you can really reduce your kind of the cost base for disaster recovery by leveraging this sort of platform, and the fact that you just have that the critical capacity running all the time, and then non-critical you can just spin up. The other benefit is that you can then add resiliency into your disaster recovery. So rather than having most organizations in their disaster recovery have a single instance of everything, the problem with that is when you fail over, you're then immediately at risk because everything's on a single instance. Whereas with the cloud, you can fail over to the environment, be on single instance, but then you can spin up resiliency very quickly within a matter of sort of minutes in order to provide that N+1 capability. And then you're not at risk then, because you've got some resiliency immediately in your platform. So just to sort of recap really, again, the Power Cloud X gives us this true hybrid cloud platform, which enables us to sort of minimize the risk and the journey to that cloud. Workloads can be moved seamlessly between the private and public clouds because we've got that automated set of controls. We can move those workloads across and move them back should we. It's a great way of trying out the sort of economics of the cloud, and also right-sizing your applications, because you can move it to the cloud, shrink it down in terms of capacity to see what the sweet spot is for that. So it's a great ability to do that. And then the public cloud services can be consumed, so you can get some of those really good platform services and consume those immediately, again, all within the sort of control. Peak capacity can be consumed on demand, and again, reduce those disaster recovery costs. And all those benefits, but the important thing is that we still maintain the governance and control. We've got that proven governance framework that we've for regulated clients, and our compliance checks are all done as code, which means that we can do continuous audit. Again, really important. And again, where a lot of companies fail down is this kind of approach. Well, they don't have this kind of code first approach. Any compliance we need to put into code. It enables us then to rapidly change it. So if there's changes in the regulation, we just have to make changes to the code once, and then that's applied to the whole environment instantaneously. And we've seen some really good sort of benefits of this, especially around things like the WannaCry and those kind of WannaCry, the meltdown issues that were out there. Because we've got these compliance checks as code, we're able to check which systems were vulnerable using that code, so that we could target our resources on the sort of 10% within the environment, which meant that there was a lot less disruption, a lot less FUD going on, because we knew exactly which systems were at risk, and then we could mitigate those appropriately. Again, security, we've got the 24/7 security operations center monitoring all of these feeds, all of these platforms, all of the audit outputs, so that we can respond to any kind of alert and critical event instantaneously. And again, we have this central data warehouse, which brings all of that information into one place, so that we can then understand what the environment looks like. Because again, that's really key for regulated markets, especially, is understanding what you've got, where it is, what it's doing, and why. Because all of those things either create risk or an unnecessary cost. So that's just really just to sum it up. I'd like to sort of open up to questions now. I think there's a chat facility. So if anyone's got any questions, then please just sort of fire away on the chat. I'll leave it a minute or so to see if anyone has any questions, but I'm more than willing to take those now. So I think there's one question coming through. So the question is, VMware moves workspaces between IBM clouds. Can you clarify this a bit? Absolutely. So if I just sort of go back to this, if anyone has any other questions, then please fire them away while I answer this. So so what we've done here, IBM Cloud gives us the ability to run bare metal servers. Well, bare metal, I mean basically dedicated physical hosts that we have complete control over. So what that's enabled us to do is create a VMware cluster that's stretched across both CSI's private Power Cloud X and IBM Cloud. And key to this is the network virtualization piece. And because of where our Power Cloud X is situated, we have low latency links into all of the cloud providers, but including IBM Cloud, which enables us to then create one network across those environments. And this is all software defined basically. So we stretch that network across into the IBM Cloud, so it's seen as one sort of logical unit effectively. We can segment it into virtual networks, but once we've got that network virtualization piece spread across, we can then also extend our VMware clusters across both Power Cloud X and within the IBM Cloud to see as one VMware cluster. And then because we've got that, we can then use the functions around storage vMotion to move those workloads across. And basically what that does is you say, I want to move a server to another host effectively, which is what this is. You're moving from one host to another host here. It basically copies that data across. And then when it's ready to flip across, once it's got all the data, it maintains that copy. When it's ready to flip across, it then says, right, now this server is the active one. So, and that just happens seamlessly, and everything in RAM is copied across the lot. Everything is so there's no loss of sessions, there's no loss of data at all. So that enables us then to move that workload seamlessly across. So hopefully that answers the question. So how do I see these approaches being audited and insured by boards? This is basically effectively the output from the compliance reports, really. And something I probably actually didn't really sort of highlight is that all of these automated, all of these compliance reports are presented in the workspace. And because we have complete control over that workspace, we can put the output into any format that you want. So some of the things that we're working with some of our clients is that we're creating dashboards and audit reports that are actually what the end user wants to see, i.e. the compliance teams or the board for that matter. And so we can take what they want to see, how they want to see it, and then we can present that raw data that we've got in the compliance reports and present that in the format that they're familiar with. And then they can drill down, but things like, where we're looking at the moment is that they've got the ability to invoke DR. So there's a tick basically for that. So the compliance team know that they can invoke DR at that point. And the compliance check that goes underneath that is all the things like, are the database logs fully replicated? Are all the files replicated? Were there any issues? Are there any issues in the DR site? And all of that data is fed up into making that kind of very simple tick. And then we can have other things like question mark that might say, actually, if you invoke DR, you might lose 10 minutes worth of data because there's a lag currently. So that's how we're presenting that. It's really about making all of that kind of data and presenting it in the format that's right for the audience. So it could be very different, but whatever the board's interested in seeing, again, we can create those dashboards based on the data that we have. So hopefully that answers the question. So another question, are there services managed by CSI, or can the customer choose to invoke DR, etc.? So, i.e. ops team at the customer. So again, this really does depend on how you want to operate. Currently, it's kind of like that shared responsibility whereby the customer makes a decision to invoke, but then we enact the DR effectively. We are looking at the future to do that completely self-service, but there are a number of challenges with that, and there are some compromises. So as it is right here, right now, the client would sort of basically call our crisis management team, and then they would invoke that. And we do sit down with clients and understand what their approach to DR is, what their approach to risk is, in order to get that right. And we interface with the existing business continuity policies. So we'll become part of that kind of crisis management team that you might have established, which will make that decision of, do I go now? Do I not go now? You know, and the sort of decision around that, because sometimes it might be the fact that actually it's going to take you half an hour to fail over all of your services, for example. And it might actually be that, you know what, the disruption's only going to last for 15 minutes. So let's not do that. But again, it's really understanding what you're trying to achieve and how you want to achieve it. And that's our differentiator, I guess, is that we have all this tooling that enables us to sort of meet what you want to try and achieve. And we're very focused on that outcome, really. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Fantastic. So I just want to confirm that the question around the approach to the audited for the question of how do you see these approaches being audited and assured by the boards. I'm hoping I've answered that question. If not, please let me know so I can expand further. It's also worth noting that all of these toolings comes under our ISO 27001 certification. We use these for our PCI certified environments. So we do all of this. We do have all these processes are audited externally, currently on a 6-month basis. And again, like I said, it's an external auditor. We've got certifications on all of those, and PCI I think is once every year, I think, currently. But again, we're more than happy to show how we do this stuff to any auditors. We're completely open book at that on this. Yeah, and I got some confirmation from there. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I think I'd like to wrap this up and hand it over to Neil.
Thanks, Scott. So thank you everybody for joining the webinar. Thank you for your time. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact CSI. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.